Okay, so sometimes in signal processing, you get this pattern um, that you could refer to as impulses and echoes, and that's an interesting idea. But I mention it because a lot of times, well, I'll go broader with this than I was intending to. What I share on this channel, I have a few rules about. One of those rules is that I try really hard not to say anything that I haven't already written and published. There are some exceptions to that rule. Sometimes talking about it helps formulate the ideas and facilitates writing better and more quickly than I otherwise could. But for the most part, this is just water spilling over a dam that has been filling for a very long time. And mostly it's just like the trickle that comes out from the bottom or spills over the top. And it reminds me of this rock face that's on one of the cliffs between town and my house, where there are mountains, they're very high, and it compresses the water table and puts tremendous pressure on the groundwater. And even though there's tons and tons of water up there from the snowpack, there's just an oozing trickle on the rock face. And it's quite pretty in the winter times. It all freezes in these cascading icicles. But you're getting some oozing water, and that's it for now. And that's just the way it is. But when these echoes happen, it makes it really difficult to, for many reasons, it's very hard to turn this off. It's not like a fountain, like a hydrant, like a yard hydrant or a faucet where you can just turn it off and walk away and go about your business. It's kind of like a high pressure deal where it takes a lot of effort to turn it off, and even as you do, there's stuff that keeps coming out. And that's why this impulse and echo idea, I think, is an accurate description of what I go through when I do share things. It's very hard to move on to other things because the Spirit doesn't just say, okay, we're done. And so you're thinking about something and then you go, because the world, the way our modern world especially works is it doesn't afford you the opportunity to easily hold revelation from God as the top priority. So when God's speaking to you, you stop whatever you're doing, you go do what he's saying. Now, that's no excuse, and it's unavoidable that if you want to go into the stream of greater frequency and content of God's word, you absolutely have to change your life around so that you can yield to the Spirit at all times, whatever that looks like and whatever that takes, however long it takes, whatever sacrifices it takes. It's certainly worth it, because the Spirit quickens all things, and it's just not this. It's not just the Spirit. Anything with God, that is the stream of improvement. That is the stream of what is best. No matter how unlike that it might seem in the moment, if you stick with it, you'll receive cascading evidences that what I'm saying in that regard is true. But anyway, so these echoes, these echoes can be, well, they just are. You can't call them frustrating or anything else. It's wonderful to get revelation. But when you get right in the stream of things, you just have to be ready for these echoes because they come. And if you ignore them, you get less. So here's some echoes that I have spent time since the last video writing, and I'm supposed to say these things too. Okay, so back onto the topic of mixing and separating. You have the mixing bowl analogy, and you're adding stuff and then it gets mixed up, and then you have to take things out that are less valuable. I'm going to take that a little further. So some of the changes that occur are that things that seemed good seem less good now. Why? Because it's all relative. And I'll go ahead and say, there's this phrase, moral relativism. And when I say relative, I don't mean that. When I say progressive, I don't mean the political ideology that sort of usurped the real meaning of the word. What I mean is that truth is successive, it's hierarchical, and it's always about what's best based on your present understanding, which will improve over time. And that causes things to shift. And I've made videos and I've talked about this in The Glory of God as Intelligence, which is, I think, a very important book. So if you haven't read that, you might want to. And it's a meaty book. That book could have easily been 5 or 10 times longer, but it was too long already. We just had to kind of be satisfied with touching on things and moving on, and just packing things in and letting folks sort it out. I will return to some of those themes in greater detail in different contexts in books that are in progress, but they won't supplant those things. It's like being bombarded by radiation from all sides. It has a greater effect than just one directed stream. So good and bad, they flip-flop. I've made videos about that too. I think I already said that. Explaining it in at least 2 different ways. Like with buckets, you have a good bucket and a bad bucket and things move around. But also the goodness and badness of things changes. And so one idea that's been bouncing around my head for a long time recently, that's probably an oxymoron, bouncing around a lot in my mind recently is the idea of Jesus cleansing the temple, and how the theme is extreme when extremes are not extremes. So a lot of what we see in the scriptures, we see good people doing, exemplary people doing, would be regarded as extreme or even illegal today, or in different contexts. And yet it was the right thing to do at that time. And you ask yourself, why? Is it limited to the fact that our laws have shifted or whatever? The answer is no. And the principal reason that their behavior was so different and so extreme is that they understood consequences and reality far more than we do, on average, and what's baked into our system. So, there's a time and a place where making a handmade whip and chasing people and lashing anyone you can catch and flipping over tables and making a real scene is exactly the right thing to do. And anything less would be inappropriate. And people weasel out of this one saying, well, that was Jesus. I don't know that there's a spot anywhere in the scriptures that says don't do what Jesus did. I'm only aware of the opposite. And I'm only aware of scriptures to say if there's a difference between you and Jesus, that's something you should change. I don't see anything about the opposite. So if you see that, let me know. And I'm happy to be educated. So good and bad, they can change. The degree of good and bad can change as these new things are being mixed in. And one thing that is worth highlighting is something that was good can become really good. Something that was really good before can be suddenly juxtaposed with something even better that was in the new amendments, the new things that were added. It could be way better than what was seen as previously the best. So all of these kinds of changes, and then you could do the same with the negative side of things, and what before seemed okay now seems really bad. And interestingly, if you care to know, if you ask the question, which of these changes will get you in the most trouble, that's an interesting line of questioning, both with yourself and what you're going to go do, just in your own private life, but then especially in what you say and do to influence others to come to the same understanding that you've come to. I'll tell you what people hate, it seems, more than anything else, is when what they thought was good is suddenly shown to be bad. That seems to be the hardest shift. So if you go to someone and you just kind of poke them and say, hey, there's this thing and it's bad, and you knew it was bad, but I'm just reminding you it's bad. They're like, yeah, okay. And they might even come to see you once a week on a Sunday, and the preacher's up there saying, oh, we need to forgive our enemies and we need to help the poor and all these things you've heard 10 billion times. And somewhere between, well, I do these minimal things so I don't feel guilty about it, and I've heard this so many times I just don't care anymore and I don't feel guilty about it. Somewhere between those, you're okay, and you keep coming, you'll give them money, you'll spend all your time there, and it's cool, right? And you'll own the fact that you're that flavor of religion and whatever. You'll proudly wave the flag of I'm this, I'm that. But the second someone comes along and says, hey, you think that thing, or you know that thing that you do or don't do that you think makes you holy, it's actually abominable before God. And God showed me this, so I have the tools to show you in clarity, and I can just give it to you. They will go crazy on you. And not in the good way, not in the way the band Heart sings about. So why is that the case? Or should we be surprised that that's the case? There's a couple of scriptures that are really interesting because this is sort of a new idea. How could something that I think makes me holy actually kind of make me a dirtbag? If you go to Daniel 10, for instance, you read about, this is one example. I kind of rag on the King James sometimes. I think they did an excellent job considering their resources. It's amazing. But this is a place where they nailed it. And that's when it's phrased, Daniel says that when an angel came to him in glory, all of a sudden his comeliness was turned into corruption. I think it's a beautiful phrase. It's very, it's almost visceral. Like, it's a powerful way of saying it. So there are other phrases too. I won't take the time to get into those scriptures, but it's a recurring theme. And lo and behold, very holy people experience this. Daniel is used as an example of righteousness by name, by God. So in whatever hierarchy there is, like, you're doing okay if God uses you as an example of righteousness, right? Be like him. And so it turns out, another theme that I keep dropping the phrase hidden holiness. And what I'm doing with all these phrases is I'm building a language. I'll tell you that. I'm building a language. So the ideas are very big, but if we go through them in long form and then we attach them to your experiences and then add some new things, and then we develop this handle that has not been used by other people, so it's not corrupted in your mind already. We put down a stake and say, this is what hidden holiness means. And then all we have to do is bring up the phrase, and it all comes back, right? So hidden holiness, one example of this is, how does the person react to their comeliness being turned into corruption? And I will tell you, this is more, this is an easier, more accurate, direct way of predicting it. You know, humans are the most complex creature on this planet. And yet, you would be shocked once you start peeling back the layers and God teaches you some of these things about human nature. You would be shocked to learn how accurately and easily you can predict a person on how small a data set. So with the tiniest set of observations, if this stuff has been beaten into you thoroughly enough, you can see a person's whole life, past, present, and future. You can see it as if it's right before your eyes. And you can tell them things that they have never told a soul. And I say, I've said in the past, If people knew how much of themselves they reveal in just a few words to one that has the Spirit of God, they'd never open their mouths again. These are wicked people, but that's almost everybody. So, and it's a true thing. So the main motivation for these folks is to hide, because that's the way they deal with the fact that they're not who they know they could be. And while we're there, I'm just gonna go ahead and put that out there too. Please never misconstrue any criticisms I ever give anyone as tearing them down in any way. Every single time I say something about anybody, there are rules that I follow. But one of them, the reason I say that is because I can see that they're actually better than that. It's not on my notes. I actually have notes this time. I'm not just looking at random things to think. But I will bring up a set of thoughts that are important. I wasn't planning on bringing this up, but the more you walk into the path of God, the more of Him you see. He shows Himself to you. This is actually on the next set of thoughts. That's going to be a separate video, this part, so I'll skip over that. The more of Him that you see, the more of you that you see. And that goes the other way too. In fact, the other video will talk about the other direction of that relationship. The next video. Here is something that you cannot escape from. And it goes in a huge pile of stuff that I might call the things you should be grateful for when it comes to where you stand with God. That could be phrased better. Reasons you should be glad you're not closer to God than you are, right? Because we say we want X, Y, Z, and then when it's put right in front of us, we're like, I'm good. I'm good. So people come to the tree of life and then they're ashamed. This is why, because it's not what they thought it would be. And what it is actually what they don't want. So in this pile, now all these things are good. God is the epitome of good. It's just we hadn't figured it out yet, right? And if you don't have other things in place, like unconditional trust in God, as you get closer and closer, that becomes a bigger and bigger obstacle. So in this pile of things that you should probably be grateful for, the fact that you're not closer to God, is the following property that you cannot turn off as you get closer. His light goes into your eyes, and you can see, and I'm speaking figuratively here because I'm not talking about these eyes necessarily, although I've met people who I believe who really do see what I'm about to tell you. You can see more of the divine potential in all things and in all people. A great deal of what we observe in people today, in terms of things that we too readily dismiss as mental health issues or other buzzwordy kind of properties, ideas, too many of those things are actually spiritual properties that have everything to do with the quantity and quality of people that have been reserved for the end times. That is a huge ball of wax that I'm not going to get into more right now. But I'm telling you that's the way it is. In that vein, there are people today. Now, the funny thing about each of these properties that I'll just mention one or two here, is that the same symptoms, if you will, can present for very different reasons. So I'm only talking about the good reasons they can be around. There are bad reasons too, and there are other reasons. But there are people on the planet right now who, when they're walking around, it's like that movie Superman with, who's this guy? Henry Cavill, the first one in that series. There's a scene, so in that storyline, if you don't know about Superman, I don't know what rock you've been living under, but in that storyline, his superpowers don't really kick in until he hits puberty, or something like that, as he gets older. So he's in school, and he looks like maybe he's in elementary school, and he starts the super hearing and super sight kick in, and it's just so overwhelming. They do a good job of cinematic effects to try to express what that would be like. And he freaks out, and he hides in a janitor closet, and then his mom comes in and kind of tries to coach him back from the ledge, figuratively speaking. And then later on, this comes back into the story, because these people who also escaped from his home planet come, and they have protective suits or something, but they're in a battle and they get knocked off. And so the bad guy, he's just bombarded by all the supervision and super hearing, and it's all at once because he's a full-grown Kryptonian. He's not a man, but and Clark makes this comment about, oh, I've had my whole life to get used to it. How do you like it? And then, proceeds to kick his butt a little bit. And I thought that, God uses filmmakers like he does all of us. And thank him for this. Thank God that he does this. Not only does he use us as much as we allow him to, he uses us as much as it would not violate our agency to do so. As much as it would not minimize our potential benefit. He uses everyone. He uses the demon-possessed even. He uses Satan himself. This is God's genius and his glory, amongst innumerable other things. Because he's that good. So thank God for that. But he uses these filmmakers to put things in, and the other side uses them too, okay? But this is that discernment, that mix. Everywhere you look, there's that mix. And these nuggets are in there, and even in movies that you might say are bad or whatever, it's like the leper that you can touch and heal if you have the power of God within you. There are ideas in that. And maybe extracting them doesn't mean telling people to go see this movie. It's just for you, internally something changed because you experienced this information. And now that change is something that you can share with others. You can bet that Jesus' mortal life was filled with experiences that are not directly conveyable to others. And yet, they changed him in a way that gave him the ability to convey those benefits in some partial fashion to others. That's actually the way covenants work. But anyway, so, excuse me. So, in the movie, Superman, he gets hit with all of this. And this is something that is quite like the real version. A theme I've been hitting on lately, and that I will continue to expand, is the idea of differences between people. And again, in all of those that I bring up, I am not attempting to differentiate capacity. I'm differentiating actuality in order to help you see your capacity is much greater than you thought. Unfathomably greater than you ever thought. The amount of joy that you can feel, the amount of sorrow that you can feel, those are obviously tied together. Maybe not obviously, but they are tied together. The amount of holiness that you can grow into, the amount of sacrifice that you can give for others. and on and on and on. It's amazing how much human potential lies untapped only because people haven't seen an example. The power of example is another theme that you'll see me write and talk more about. And it is all about Jesus. So, anyway, so super sight, super hearing, there are people on this planet right now that when they walk around, all they can see and hear is potential for improvement. It's like almost a shouting voice to them. Even if they don't hear it, and even if they don't see it, it floods their awareness. And it is a thing that you have to get used to. I won't go as far as calling it painful. It is intense. Unfortunately, some people that have been sent here at this time for this reason react to this by saying there's a pill for that. And that's a phrase I mentioned in a video probably 3 years ago, and I only know because I randomly rewatched it the other day, which I really don't like doing. It's extremely demotivating to see just what things I've said before and then look at the response. And I don't mean that how you'd probably presume I mean that. I mean it's very demotivating to see things that you value so highly being taken so lightly, but it's not because of you. I mentioned Jesus cleansing the temple. It wasn't because of him. It was because of his zeal for the Father. And in a video I mentioned or made a short time ago, and I was talking about a book I would crawl across the country on my hands and knees to get a copy of if I didn't already have one and didn't know the things in it. I've read it. If you ever ask yourself why you don't receive these things yet, it's because you don't care as much. So, this is completely related to the wheat and the chaff conversation. Because part of what has to happen for you to be winnowed is you have to be subjected to the winds and the fire. And the reason for that is not because God is cruel, or I don't know what else you'd like to impose upon him for the harshness of human experience. It's that there is only so much that can be done to persuade people to find value in what is actually valuable. And in many ways, the only way that can happen is beating you with oversized nunchucks, throwing you into the air, having the wind blow away everything you thought was part of you or had any meaning in your life or value, and then seeing the result and seeing how all that stuff that got taken out of you is super flammable or taken away from you is super flammable. It's subject to something so prominent. The ancients believed it was a fundamental element because it was all over the place. And what's left has much, much more value than what you started with, but it had to be separated, taken out. There are things that you can only learn through experience. And if there were any other way, God would make it possible. He'd pay the price. People think, I've met a lot of people, I think it's a natural thought to think that God holds back. He never, ever holds anything back. There is no price that he can pay that he has not already paid. And there is no price that he can currently pay that he's not already paying. He does absolutely everything that can be done. The problem, if I had to sum it up in the simplest terms, is that the very things he does that no one else can do for our benefit that we otherwise would not have, prevent him from doing the other things that are sort of the only things we see, which are much lesser things. And that's the opportunity of all the people who love him to serve others in this giant human chain that begins at the Father and goes out to everybody in a big sea of a flow of light. All right, anyway, well, I'm trying to tie up some loose ends. I've introduced about 1 million more. But getting back to the idea of Superman, so there are people who see these things and hear these things. And as they go out and try to share what they see, it's an extraordinarily painful situation because you can't turn it off. And that I'm not just referring to the information that's beaming into you all the time. What you actually see is you see what you would do and say in their position and what God could do with you in their position. You see what you value, what you would value, what you don't value, all that projected out into a person or a thing. You can walk through a park or, a building site or some project at work, and it's all the same. It's the light in your eyes, and it comes from God, and it comes commensurate with the quantity of light He's given you that you have access to. It's a bandwidth question and an experience and understanding question. You can't turn it off. So what ends up happening is you see this, how the light would work in their situation, and it fills you with desire, because when you're filled with light, all you want to see is the flow of light. And it consumes you in the best of ways. And in attempting to bring to pass more of the kingdom as it is in heaven on earth, in persuasive actions of trying to share motivation for the actions that are required to bring about the outcomes that you see in the eye of faith, you're almost guaranteed to end up in a situation where the fullness of what you see and feel is blocked. Partially, in the best of cases, and completely in the worst of cases, and maybe in an even worse case, it's actively fought against. And when that happens, here's something you've never heard before. When that happens, how you feel is you feel as if you've done or haven't done what they have done or haven't done, but with all your same understanding of God. So you haven't sinned, but you will feel as if you have. And the reason is, in some sort of metaphysical mechanics, the Holy Ghost through you is now offended by them, but they're too blind to see and feel that on the level you do. They do feel it, but it's much more minimal, because they're already sort of blind and constrained in what they can see and feel compared to what you can. And you feel that pain. Gracefully, it's temporary, but that's what you feel. And so it really is a price that you're paying in extending light and truth to others, in volunteering as a conduit for God to help reach others. And this is what Nephi was shown in the vision of the tree of life, and his angel guide talked about the love of God shedding itself abroad through the hearts of men. That's what I'm describing. It's not put as clearly there, but that's what it was all about. He's all about. So, anyway, we come to see more good and more bad, and this is so long. I hate making videos because I just can't turn this stuff off, and everything that comes, I have to say it, so I don't risk not getting more. But a point I don't want to close this out without saying is that as new stuff is added in and it's mixed up and separated again, one of the big problems people have is they hold to what was with something good before, but now has been revealed to not be what is good now. They hold to what was with good, but they perceived it as a whole, as one good whole. And now it's been revealed to only be with what was good. And they hold to it as if it's the good thing. Everything's about mixing and splitting. And you only keep going up by spitting out the stuff that's no longer as good as you thought it was. As new things are added on. That's how you flow through and up, right? So, this is a huge pitfall. So many people fall for this. The saddest example of this are the people that have so much light that you can give them something that's not all that great, and they will extract immense value out of it. It's like someone's super thirsty, and you give them this nasty, putrid pool of water, and they are just somehow extracting all this clean water out of it. But they don't, and this is where the analogy falls apart because it's so ridiculous. They can't see the difference between the clean water and the filthy water. And as they're extracting it, the stuff left behind is even worse than what you started with. But they hold to all of it. They cling to all of it as misers of falsehood, right? It happens. I've seen this so many times. It's like every day I see this. And they just can't see that the filth that's mixed into the water, they need to let it go. I'll end with this interesting idea. I mentioned recently about familiarity and how it kind of blinds us. If you could read the visions of the tree of life with fresh eyes, one of the things you might notice is the connection between the fountain of water and the tree and the rod of iron, because they are sort of described synonymously, and all three of them are the love of God. So they're three very different things, but you can ponder that on your own. But zooming into the water, it's filthy. It's filthiness, and it's a gulf that separates the wicked and the righteous, and on and on. So how could a fountain that has filthy water be the love of God? And there's a lot you could talk about there, but staying on point, it's clean when it comes out. So when water flows down a river, it's going to be dirty towards the end because of all the sediment it picks up as it goes. There's adulteration happening in the flow. But that doesn't mean that that water didn't come from somewhere. And wherever it came out of is clean when it came out of the ground. So this is, it's an inescapable part of the nature of water that the further downstream you encounter it, the more dirt it's going to have in it. And you have to follow it upstream for it to become cleaner. If you hold to the dirty, nasty stuff that's not part of what makes it valuable, you can't go upstream. And I hope that that provides you some value to think about.